Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new How to Bass. And today, I'm going to show you how to make this sound, which weirdly involves FM8, and just not in the way that anyone would ever expect, or probably do, because as it turns out, I just don't like FM8 at all. But let's explain what's going on here. So this is almost sort of like a weird vocodery kind of thing. Almost, but not quite. What I'm doing is I've loaded in I'm recording a modulator into Harmor, like I do when I do vocoder things. I put a modulator in a Harmor inside Patcher because that's the only way I can get a sampler going on, but also because I have direct control over the time position via automation. And that's pretty great in terms of controlling, the actual modulation. But here's where stuff gets fun. I'm using FM8, but I'm using it in its effect form inside Patcher. And what this is doing is I'm not using it. I am modulating modulating the input, but I'm also modulating by the input. Operator F here, I've got on the parabol sine-ish waveform, and it's going out, but it's being modulated by the modulator, by the Harmor input. And then the Harmor input's also being modulated by operator E here, which I'm automating. Also going on in the side there. The way that this works is that FM8's effects version can FM incoming audio. It's a bit weird, and handling it is kind of a pain in the ass, but it can do some fun things. And the way we control it inside Patcher is that I'm using a generator version of Patcher, which means it's in the sequencer. And when a note is generated, it triggers Harmor, and then it also triggers FM8. To get this to work inside FL, you have to go into FM8, go into the wrapper settings, and tell it to be MIDI input port 0. Because by default, it's a MIDI input port nothing, and it won't actually accept MIDI even if you tell it to inside Patcher. But then if you put on port 0, it'll actually accept the MIDI input as the note value. So now the notes coming in Harmor and FM8 are both the same, which means that the FM values, which it is modulating by, are going to be all the correct pitches, which is kind of nice. It's kind of good. Low levels FM of the input are modulating operator F. F is just the output operator, and then E is also modulating the input. So we create this nice little loop-de-loop going on here, and we get this result. I'm also layering in the not FM version. So here's what just the FM sounds like. And here's what the original just regular sounds like. That's what that sounds like in here. And now inside Harmor, what I've done is I've turned off speed, and I turned almost smoothing all the way off, and I am automating time. I've also turned sharpness off, and I turned all the scale off. This means that when the notes that it's going to play are going to very heavily adhere to the correct harmonic behavior of the note value, as opposed to what it does by default, which is move around according to what the original recording was doing. But that's not what we wanted to do. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. If you want to do it, you can try it yourself. It's kind of interesting. I've also turned it up. I turned it up way up in pitch. You can see that it's the appropriate bass level, but by default, it resamples things. We put it in here like this at lower levels to give you more headroom, more harmonics to work with. In theory, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, point being, I had to pitch it up really high for it to be at the correct level. And then we're basically modulating that through FM8. People who are watching, I'm actually streaming this live right now. As when I do my bass research, I decided, hey, I'll just do that today. Only whatever I do will end up being how to bass. And getting this to work was an incredible amount of frustration, but most of it was just sort of utilitarian stuff, like how do I get FM8 to behave in a certain way that I'm used to other things behaving, and then how do I just kind of get familiar with its system and that kind of thing. And apparently also that its saw waves and square waves are filtered by default. And man, that was annoying because I thought that there was a filter engaged somewhere and that I was just missing it, but no, that's not what was up. But that's just my fault because I'm not familiar. I don't use FM8 enough to understand just the way that it's presented. And other than that, though, this is actually relatively straightforward stuff. And then after that, I EQ it just to kind of balance it. And then I used a wave shaper to kind of bring back some high frequency saturation. I'm EQing the not saturated and a saturated by each other side by side, and then they're both going into a compressor to be compressed together. Pretty straightforward stuff. Yeah. But this, I just wanted to have a kind of a basic look at using what I call post FM, because we were FMing something in post as opposed to generating something with FM, although we are doing a little bit of that too. I may do something more complicated with this in the future. I have actually done things more complicated with this, but actually, if you look at the base research recap 2, you'll see me do something that was a little bit more complicated with the FM, the post FM, but I didn't really explain how that worked, when that one worked out. And also, I'm not totally sure because that one was a lot easier. Like, getting that to do what it was doing was much simpler than the stuff I had to do to get this one to work. But this is still a relatively simple concept. You can just FM, you could use the input oscillator as an oscillator. You can either FM by it or FM with it. FMing with it is interesting just because if you FM it with something else, the intensity is way lower than it should be. There might be a reason for that inside FM8, just a setting that I'm not seeing. But if for some reason it's like as if you only have 10% of your usual range. But if you FM an oscillator by the input oscillator, you get their full range. And I was experimenting a little bit with that, with like creating an oscillator source inside Harmor that would be very interesting, and then FMing an oscillator with that on the side. And it got interesting, but I didn't get anything that I would have considered a sort of a finished result. And so I decided to do something a little bit more steady with this, and it worked out. Yeah. So if you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.